Okay, this is going to try to be a really quick response to ego storms about the relationship of Husserl to Sartre and Heidegger. Again, this is a technical video. If people, aren't interested in these branches of philosophy, this probably is not the video for you. Okay, at any rate, I do think you're right that the way to understand Sartre's transcendence of the ego is to see him in some way combating with Husserl's notion of intentionality, that for Husserl all consciousness was consciousness of something. And I guess in a lot of ways, Sartre just radicalizes this and says, yeah, not only is consciousness always of something, but consciousness can be so of something that it's nothing but that which it's of, that is, that which it presences or makes room for liquidates consciousness itself. Now, that doesn't mean that consciousness is without the capacity to posit itself in a reflective way. I mean, the book that you use, Transcendence of the Ego, Sartre makes a big distinction between positional self-conscious and non-positional self-consciousness, which is also called thetic and non-thetic, or this issue of, do you have an I that necessarily and always accompanies the, quotes, Kantian I think, right? I mean, so in some ways it's a discussion of Kantian notions of subjectivity. I think the way to get at its relationship to Heidegger is, one of the most important books to get at for Heidegger is this book here called The History of the Concept of Time, which all said and done was the rough draft to Being in Time. And what's so fascinating is if you look at the book, it's basically about the first 130 pages. It's about this whole section right here is a long ongoing introduction to Husserl's notion of intentionality, the importance of intentionality, that intentionality is the key discovery in phenomenology. Now again, intentionality isn't meant in the same way as in analytic philosophy. I think in analytic philosophy we think of intentionality as intent, that is, did you intend to do something or not? Whereas intentionality, as it's understood in the continental tradition, particularly in phenomenology and existentialism, it's meant as directing itself toward. And you see, intentionality is the basic characteristic of consciousness, and it's also the basic characteristic of the body and of all the senses. That is to hear something, to see is to see something, to touch is to touch something, to feel is to feel something about the situation that you're in. I mean, the emotions themselves are intentional vectors. That's the way that Sartre and certainly Carl Schraag as well. Okay, so by the time Heidegger gets to Being in Time, he just lops off that whole introduction and just starts at that second part. I think that's really interesting. This, somebody who studies Heidegger's work, and then this is the basic problems of phenomenology is the latter section of what would have been the sort of follow-up of Being in Time, sort of what comes immediately after. The point about Husserl, though, is that Heidegger was heavily influenced by this discovery of intentionality, but he wanted to radicalize it and put it into the world. He wanted to get out of the more eidetic orientations of Husserl, that Husserl, for some people, now I don't think that this is right, but I think Heidegger was right to anticipate misunderstanding, that for some people it still is caught within a kind of mentalism, and it makes it seem as if there is this, for lack of a better term, cognitive representing of the world. Now I don't think that that's way too simplistic of an understanding of what Husserl's project is. The more robust criticism here would be basically that both Sartre and Heidegger use Husserl against himself. And the one that you want to look here is, this was one of Husserl's book called The Phenomenology of Internal Time Consciousness. Now, this was edited by Heidegger and has an introduction by Calvin Schraag. And Calvin Schraag was my great mentor at Purdue. But the point here is that you see the snake there. Yeah, the phenomenology of internal, the Ouroboros, right? The phenomenology of internal time consciousness, it lays out the framework for how you don't really need subject-object relations, what you need is what's called longitudinal intentionality. That is, you need an intentionality that is not simply like an arc of consciousness being consciousness of an object in the world, or consciousness contemplating a mathematical object, or consciousness tasting something or feeling something or being angry about something. It's none of those, but it's the way that there is a longitudinal intentionality that will become, in Heidegger's term, a kind of retaining that awaits. It's a stretching along. And once you've adequately done a phenomenology of internal time consciousness, you start to realize that the subject is nothing but time. That is, time. And you got to look at that other video that I shot just a couple of days ago about the difference between time and temporality. I mean, this is a key distinction within phenomenology, that time is admittedly something like movement or change, and we can see this at countless levels of analysis, both, astral bodies moving, or just, human bodies, animal bodies moving through space, or you could see the rate of change in a chemical connection or a bonding activity at various levels. But the notion of temporality isn't just change. It has to do with a clearing of memory, but see, we got to be careful. See, memory makes it seem like it's overly subjective, whereas memory might be part of the way that nature evolved an organ for elongating its openness to time. That is, instead of just being in time, we are time as temporality. That would be the way to say it, in phenomenology. We are time as temporality. That is, even though my body is the oldest it's ever been, and now it's the oldest it's ever been, and there's a sense in which it's aging, it's not just aging in a way where the movement is a record of the age and then the past is wholly gone by. No, the past for us is something that is retained and we dwell within it. And that's why, historicity itself starts to become this looming problem. What we call history and culture and thought suddenly seem to be much larger than any individual, and certainly not something inside the head. If anything, we've fallen into the socio-historical conditions of mind, and now with a personal brain, we sort of appropriate and participate in that which transcends us, and we open up to everything from, like having a name that others have given you in a language that others created, to having calendars which give orientation well beyond you, but now you orient yourself within that. Okay, I guess I'll end off here with, from my own perspective, the two best interpreters of Husserl, and many people have written on Husserl. Husserl's got so much work. I mean, it's amazing. Merleau-Ponty as well. I mean, arguably Merleau-Ponty is one of the better interpreters of Husserl. But secondary, if I can use that term, people who do primary work on a given scholar, sometimes called secondary scholars. The two best are, I think, Joseph Kakelman's, his book here called Edmund Husserl's Phenomenology. I don't know if people can see that, Edmund Husserl's Phenomenology. And then also Robert Sokolowski, Husserlian Meditations. Both of these texts really just outstanding. Kakelman's and Sokolowski, if you want to learn more about Husserl. I hope that some of that helps. And please, people, read up on your phenomenology and existentialism.